Why is Russia invading Ukraine? That's the question that we're going to answer together on today's video. We're going to look at what I believe to be the most accurate assessment of what's happening on the battlefield in Ukraine right now as we speak. We're going to look at Putin's rationale for invading Ukraine, and we're going to finish off with the obvious question: where do we go from here? You're not going to want to miss this. If you're new to our channel, a warm welcome to you. I'm Dr. Steve Turley. Welcome you to the Patriot Professor's Den, where I help you to think better so you can feel better in these crazy and turbulent times. So make sure to subscribe to this channel and be a part of our online community. Also, we've got a wonderful virtual conference coming up this Saturday, May 5th. We're calling it our RINO hunting virtual conference. We're all going to learn how to vote out as many Republicans in name only as possible. I'll be joined by some amazing guests who are going to give you tried and true strategies to vote out rhinos and vote in patriots all across the country. Now, we sold out of tickets a couple of weeks back, but due to popular demand, we've upgraded our virtual event software to allow for 1,000 more people to join us, and we even keep in the 90% discount on tickets for you. But we sold out in 4 days last time, so don't wait. Click on that link below right now and join me, my special guests, and your fellow patriots in the comfort of your own home for a day you'll never forget. It's going to be absolutely awesome. So click on that link below and let's go rhino hunting together this weekend. Can't wait. All right, gang, let's dive right in here. So here we are. We're now closing in on a full week of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And since the first day, I've been arguing on this channel that when all is said and done, this is about far more than just Russia and Ukraine. This is an event that's changing the world as we know it. I mean, no matter what happens, no matter what the outcome, the world has forever changed from this point forward. However, that being said, I've been doing a lot of talk radio interviews of late, and I have to say that there still seems to be considerable confusion as to what Putin really wants from all this. Why did Russia invade Ukraine? What's really going on here? And I want to help bring some clarity to that question. And I need to say at the outset that I have absolutely no dog in this fight. I've done lots of videos on Putin and his role in the rise of a new post-secular, post-globalist age. I've also followed very closely the election of President Zelensky in Ukraine. We did a video on that from back in 2019. He was actually being heralded as the Trump of Ukraine back then. He was a populist entertainer, a total outsider who was voted in as president by a landslide. I say this because I want to quell the notion that I'm here rooting for one side over the other side or acting as a pro-Russian apologist. From day one of this conflict, the only thing that I want to bring you as your daily fake news antidote, the only thing I want to bring you is the truth of what's really happening here as best as I understand it. I give you all my sources in the newsfeed portion of these videos. You're most certainly invited to follow up with those sources and do your own research, right? I try to be as absolutely transparent as possible in these videos, and I want to make sure that we all have an accurate assessment of what's happening here so that we don't get swept up in the information warfare and the propaganda coming in from all sides. So with that said, Tucker Carlson had on his show the other night the military analyst, retired Colonel Douglas Macgregor. Now, Macgregor is a former senior advisor to the Secretary of Defense under President Trump. And Tucker had him on to cut through all the information warfare that's going on out there and to help us make better sense of what's happening in this horrible and tragic conflict. First and foremost, Tucker wanted to know what Colonel Macgregor believed was the current state of the war, the current state of the battlefield. Here's what he had to say.
The first question is, where are we now? We keep hearing these reports about a Russian convoy coming into the capital city, et cetera, but big picture, where is the war as of tonight?
Well, the first 5 days, we witnessed a very slow, methodical movement of Russian forces into eastern Ukraine. That is Ukraine, the third of Ukraine, which is on the eastern side of this river called the Dnieper. They moved slowly, cautiously. They tried to reduce casualties among the civilian population, tried to give as many Ukrainian troops and forces as possible the opportunity to give up, to surrender. That is over. And the phase in which we find ourselves now, Russian forces have now maneuvered to encircle and surround the remaining Ukrainian forces and destroy them through a series of massive rocket artillery strikes, airstrikes, with Russian armor then slowly but surely closing the distance and annihilating what's left. So this is the beginning, frankly, of the end of Ukrainian resistance.
So the ugly stuff is just beginning, it sounds like.
Yes.
Okay.
Now, that was a very important assessment of what we have been seeing thus far. And we've been talking about this on other videos. Alex and Alexander over at the Duran have addressed this multiple times on their excellent analysis of what's been going on in Ukraine. Russia began launching what weapons analyst Scott Ritter refers to as a soft war. As Colonel McGregor pointed out, it's a war that deliberately attempts to minimize the amount of damage and casualties inflicted so as to maximize the opportunities for the armed forces to surrender. That is what we have seen thus far. As Colonel McGregor has noted, that phase of the war is now over, and Russia is about to unleash the power of what's called the Cauldron Formation. Russian troops have surrounded the Donbass region to the east, which contains upwards of about 60,000 Ukrainian troops. And that surrounding is called the cauldron, which functions like a boa constrictor, which crushes everything inside it. And you also notice, too, that there's a cauldron-like formation around the wider area of Ukraine, culminating around Kiev. So, in effect, you've got a cauldron within a cauldron. And according to Colonel McGregor and the analysts that I've been studying, gang, that's checkmate. Okay, militaristically speaking, this is over. And that this is, how this ends is basically a foregone conclusion. Again, this is horrible. It's beyond tragic, but this is what I believe is happening right now in Ukraine. Then comes the big question. Here's what Colonel McGregor had to say when asked what he believes Putin's endgame is in all of this.
So this is a question you don't often hear asked, but it's essential to our welfare here in the United States, to our strategic thinking about this. What is Putin's goal here? What's his aim?
Well, I think Vladimir Putin set out to honor his word of 2007. 2007 at the Munich Security Conference, he said, we will not tolerate the expansion of NATO into a point where your NATO, your border, is touching Russia, specifically Ukraine and Georgia. We see these as essentially Trojan horses for NATO's military power and U.S. influence, subversion, and so forth. He then turned to several opportunities to reinforce that over and over and over again, most recently with President Biden, in the hopes that he could avoid taking action to effectively clean out eastern Ukraine of any opposition forces whatsoever, and to put his forces in a position vis-a-vis NATO to deter us from any further attempts to influence or change Ukraine into effectively a platform for the projection of U.S. and Western power into Russia. Now, his goal, as we see it at the moment, is to seize this entire area of eastern Ukraine. That's pretty clear. He's going to roll up to that river. Up near Kiev, he has actually moved over the river and is preparing to go in and capture that city entirely. At that point, he has to decide what else he wants to do. I don't think he wants to go any further west. I think he'd be very satisfied to hold that point. But he would like whatever emerges from this that we call Ukraine, whether it's just the western side or it encompasses some of the east and the west of Ukraine, to be neutral, non-aligned, and preferably friendly to Moscow. That he will accept. Anything short of that, his war has been a waste of time.
So for me, ever since this whole thing broke out, and I devoted a few videos to this prior to the invasion as well, what Colonel McGregor just said is just so key to understanding what's happening before us here. Again, it's not a matter of whether this is right or wrong, right? The issue is trying to understand precisely why this is happening. And it was interesting because right after Russia launched its assault, Tulsi Gabbard, who is a veteran, tweeted this out, quote, "This war and suffering could easily have been avoided if Biden and NATO had simply acknowledged Russia's legitimate security concerns regarding Ukraine's becoming a member of NATO, which would mean U.S. NATO forces right on Russia's border." In other words, another Cuban Missile Crisis, but from Russia's angle. It's essential to understand that Tulsi's emphatically not acting as a Russian agent here, right? She's actually giving a rather sober analysis of what happened leading up to this. Western leaders thought that the possibility of Ukrainian membership into NATO, which had been promised to Ukraine ever since the 2008 Bucharest conference, Western leaders thought that could be used as leverage against Russia to force Russia to be more hospitable to Western demands on it. But we're finding out today it was nothing less than a prodding tool that provoked the bear, and now the bear has been unleashed. For months now, the West has been telling Russia it needs to engage in diplomacy, and whenever Russia did so, the West would arrogate itself to telling Russia what it needs to do, which ultimately is to accept sort of the unstoppable advance of liberal globalism throughout the sphere of NATO expansion. From Obama to Biden, the official position of the United States and NATO is that Russia is going to eventually bend the knee to liberal globalism one way or the other, and if they have to, they're going to have to get rid of Putin, and they're going to put in administrators who are going to allow Russians to go fully woke. I mean, in other words, abide by the norms of the neoliberal globalist order. And Putin said, no, we're never going to do that. And NATO, in effect, called his bluff, and here we are. So what Putin wants, and what I think he's absolutely going to get, is in eastern Ukraine, either just the Donbass region or most of Ukraine east of the Dnieper River. The Dnieper River divides the east and west of Ukraine. He's going to have that part of Ukraine as thoroughly pro-Russian. It already is, more or less. And he's going to have what's left of Ukraine functioning as a neutral border state between Russia and NATO, similar to Finland, how Finland has been acting up to this point. Whether Finland stays that way is another issue altogether. So now the question is whether Bumbling Biden and NATO would go along with that arrangement. And here's Colonel McGregor's answer.
I think President Biden and Sullivan, his national security advisor, have already given some indication of their readiness to accept something like that. They're not going to have any choice. Either they accept it, or then they put him in the position of having to do more than he would like to do, which would probably not go down well with NATO. No one really wants Russian forces on their border, least of all Poland.
Right.
So I think Sullivan and Biden will essentially tell Zelensky, if he is still the president at that point, and if he's still running any semblance of the Ukrainian government, which is largely collapsing now, if he is still there, he's going to be told, accept the deal, go neutral, because there really is no choice.
You are hearing elements in the United States Congress, it's almost unanimous in the media, calling on the Biden administration to enforce a so-called no-fly zone over Ukraine. What would be the effect of that?
Well, you'd end up at war with Russia, because the Russians are not going to allow Western aircraft, U.S. aircraft, flying over the battlefield in eastern Ukraine under any circumstances. And Stoltenberg, the Secretary General of NATO, flew to Poland to stop the Poles from essentially offering MiG-29 aircraft that were improved and modernized to the Ukrainians, allowing their pilots to come to Poland, fly these into Ukraine. He put a stop to it, saying anything like that could lead to war, and NATO will not go to war. And see, this is the interesting part. Now everyone is talking about spending lots of money on defense and lots of money for NATO, but very shortly people are going to begin to ask why. Why are we doing it? Because it's patently obvious that NATO is not in a position to fight, not in a position to challenge the Russians. So I think Mr. Biden's problem tonight is not just his narrative is going to break down very rapidly over the next few days as it becomes obvious that this whole Ukraine business was a fantasy on his part. He's going to end up trying to write checks that he can't cash, because we can't afford a massive military buildup. We can't afford to put more forces forward. And if we try to do it, it'll be self-defeating. So I think we're in a real crisis now that no one has really figured out yet, and that is NATO itself and our position on the European continent. All of this is now at risk.
So there you are. I found that interview, frankly, to be the most realist and realistic assessment of what's happening in Ukraine thus far. And I hope that this contributed to at least a portion of your ongoing understanding of this tragic situation as well. Now, before you go, you will definitely want to check out my latest video I just uploaded on my reaction to Biden's State of the Union. A new poll has just come out that found that the majority of the nation believe he is not mentally fit to be president. Things are not turning out very good for old Joe, so make sure to click on the link, and I'll see you over there. God bless.